I hated stillness for most of my life. For me, like, the worst experience was calling all my friends and they're all busy, and now I'm home alone and I can hear the clock ticking. That was hell for me. Now I'm head over heels in love with stillness. Stillness is really the faithful spouse, never leaving us, but always waiting for us to come home. I hope you'll come home. Hello, my friends. Today we're going to talk about your relationship with stillness. What does that look like? Why is one's relationship with stillness important? Well, it's been on my mind. There's this talk that we discussed in church today, and I particularly like it because he served Christianity in Japan for a time, and my mission statement is to bridge gaps between East and West, men and women, and self and other. And I love that he incorporated some Japanese ideas, characters, and meanings into this Christian General Conference talk. So it's begun, the bridging of the gaps between East and West. I'm very interested in using Eastern wisdom to enhance covenant living among members of the Restored Christian Church, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. But don't worry if you're not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This podcast can still benefit you as we examine the question, what does your relationship with stillness look like, and why is it important? I'm not going to be getting into too much LDS-specific things. Your mind just has to be open enough to gain the wisdom from some Old Testament wisdom and Proverbs. And an open mind is really a key component to having a great relationship with stillness. And a closed mind, in my experience, is what kept me from a relationship with stillness. In ramping up to this lesson on today, on Sunday, which is when I'm recording this, my mind was also carried back to when I didn't have a great relationship with stillness. In my youth, I lived for the party. I lived for the social scene. I lived for the dance. I lived for the joke. I lived for being with friends, playing sports, hiking, being active. For me, like, the worst experience was calling all my friends and they're all busy, and now I'm home alone and I can hear the clock ticking. That was hell for me. Like, please just don't, like, let anything in life happen, good or bad, as long as it is titillating, as long as it's kind of vibrating a little bit so that I can avoid a state of restfulness. And as I'm thinking of my friends right now, I have a couple of people close to me who I care about who are struggling in their relationship with stillness. And I was thinking about, when did that change for me and why and how? And I found on my podcast history, yes, sometimes I forget things I've done, I found an Ode to Stillness podcast episode. And I do recommend it to you if you aren't quite yet in love with stillness. I recommend it to you if you are. Be prepared, it is weird, but that's because it's my podcast episode. And I've never met anyone weirder than me. But I end up kind of like doing this impromptu meditation on stillness, but really it ends up being with stillness, and I end up speaking to stillness. And if you listen, you can really gather how I feel about stillness and how I see her. And it wasn't always that way. And if you are afraid of stillness, you might want to give that a listen and to get some ideas of what it is that's valuable in stillness, that's worth seeking and developing a relationship with. And we'll get into that a little bit more in this podcast, and as I mentioned, some things from this talk as well. But yeah, one of my friends is just flat out avoiding stillness, and he's just running in circles around her. And I want you to think now, what does your relationship with stillness look like? Do you like stillness? Is being with stillness a grinding experience? Are all pauses awkward? If they are, that means there's some work for you to do on your relationship with stillness. Do you sometimes get along with her? More often than not? Or are you infrequently found happy together? Why is the relationship with stillness important? This general authority from my church says, it is interesting to note that the Japanese word for busy, isogashi, is made up of a character with two symbols. The one on the left means heart or spirit, and the one on the right means death, suggesting perhaps that being too busy to nourish our spirits can lead us to die spiritually. He goes on to say, the Lord, or God, whatever God is in your mind, knew that in this fast-paced world full of distractions and in commotion, that making quality time for him or her would be one of the major challenges of our day. Speaking through the prophet Isaiah from the Old Testament, he provided these words of counsel and caution, which can be likened unto the tumultuous days in which we live. In returning and rest shall ye be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength, and ye would not. But ye said, no, for we will flee upon horses. Therefore shall ye flee. And we will ride upon the swift. Therefore shall they that pursue you be swift. That's the end of that Isaiah verse. In returning and rest shall ye be saved. What does that mean to be saved? And what does this have to do with a relationship? Saved for me means, I remember my older brother had a shirt when I was just sort of getting into Christianity in my teenage years, and he had this funny shirt that said, Jesus saves after every game, and it was like a picture of an old school Nintendo. The joke being that if you don't save, you lose your progress. And I remember thinking that that shirt was intended to ridicule the idea of someone saving you. Just in general, there's a lot of just ignorance around the idea of salvation. What does it mean to be saved? In returning and rest shall ye be saved, says Isaiah. There is so much in that. For me, salvation is any time I feel like I've been lifted up from off of a cliff that I'm about to fall off. Now, yes, I do mean that metaphorically, but I'm talking about the feeling, right? So this could be a feeling of anytime I'm in deep need or shallow need. Anytime I'm in need, I feel desperate. I feel like without a resource or a solution that my need requires, my life will not continue or be sustained at the level of quality at which I want to operate or I'm designed to operate. That's salvation in my mind. A hungry person who gets a meal is saved. A lonely person who has company is saved. An ignorant person who gains education is saved. When war ends, people are saved. Whether the need is spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, individual, or collective, wherever a need exists, and needs emerge all constantly, like water from a well, they just are always coming up. Wherever a need is met, salvation has occurred. So what is the need that is met? In rest and in returning and in quietness. He goes on to say, even though our confidence comes from a strength developed in quiet times, sitting with the Lord in meditation and reflection, we do not. Why not? For those of us whose relationship with stillness is still somewhat tenuous, why do you think you're avoiding getting intimate with stillness? What are you afraid you'll find there? For those of you who have begun a satisfying relationship with stillness, what is it that you have found there? You know, I love and am here to support all relationships, especially the marriage relationship. It's my favorite one because I haven't had it yet, not a good one. So I'm still on the hunt, and that accounts for my research and my life's mission. And I can't help but believe that an individual's relationship with stillness carries the greatest impact on that individual's relationship with his or her spouse, children, friends, and community. And the reason is because one's relationship with one's self molds the patterns for one's relationships with everyone and everything else. It's what we're avoiding in stillness is us. There are parts of ourself that we are afraid to come in contact with. Parts of us that we are afraid to acknowledge. Parts of us that we are afraid to see. And the reason embarking on a journey to become intimate with stillness is it so drastically affects in a positive way our relationships with spouse, children, and everyone else, is because those parts of our soul that we come in contact with through stillness, we come to love. Even if we don't choose to act out on those aspects of ourselves in the same scenarios that we may have in the past, we still feel compassion toward that part of us. And then when we see that part of us in others, the pattern with which we engage with it is also compassionate. So we're looking at ourselves in the mirror in stillness. And when we incorporate a compassionate, forgiving, loving God or counterparty like Jesus Christ, whose infinite atonement sees these parts of us that we've avoided and loves them and feels compassion toward them, then these patterns of interacting with these traits can be applied to the same traits when we detect them in our fellow men. One's relationship with oneself molds the patterns for one's relationships with everyone and everything else. And one's relationship with stillness is one's relationship with oneself. If you are avoiding stillness, you are avoiding you, God, and the God that is you. In returning and rest shall ye be saved. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength, and ye would not. But ye said, no, we'll flee upon horses, we'll go to the party. Therefore shall ye flee and go to the party. And we will ride upon the swift. We'll be busy, busy, busy. We'll fill our to-do list. We'll have things, and we'll be able to share our to-do list with people and brag about how busy we are and how much things we get done. Therefore shall they that pursue you be swift. The real generosity of God is to match what we bring. Karma. So beautiful. Whew. So we choose distraction. We run away from stillness. We avoid a relationship with stillness. And the tempo or pace at which we run away, will we be pursued by chaos? By that same pace, we will be pursued by the opposite of stillness. What mercy. It's almost like God and the real you are deadly committed to meeting you, to finding you, to becoming one with you again. And they will not let up. You can't avoid them forever. You can only avoid them until you fatigue and tire, and there's nowhere else to go but to sit on the ground because you're so spent. And there, stillness will find you, and you will find you, and God will find you. Returning, I love that word. I have to say a little bit on that word. In returning shall ye be saved. What does that mean? Returning to what? What is it that we're running from when we run from stillness? Yes, ourselves, but which version of ourselves? I mean, sometimes we identify as the person who's always busy. We identify by our accomplishments. Someone says, "Who are you?" And you hand them your resume. Here's a checklist of things I've accomplished. That's me. But returning to the true you implies that you're returning to something beyond your activities, an element of you that has nothing to do with your doings and your resume and your accomplishments. Let me ask you this question. Are we physical bodies having spiritual experiences sometimes? Or are we spiritual beings having a temporary bodily experience. I believe that before we all came to earth, we were something. There is an element of who you are that is eternal and formless. It predates your body. It predates any body you may have had before this body. It predates any form. I think of it as spirit or intelligence, something that is uncreated and that was in the beginning with God. That's who you're returning to. You, that part of you. That part that is more you than the current you. That part of you that was you way before you got your name at birth. And that part of you that is going to outdate the you that is buried in the ground. That is who you're returning to. And why is that salvation? Well, isn't there a need? Don't you have a need to know thyself? Don't you have a need to know God? To know you as someone who never dies? Someone who can't be killed and therefore has no cause to fear? The fearless version of you? Does that version exist? And if it does exist, are you going to find it fleeing upon horses or being busy, going about your day mindlessly, just more and more of the same rat race? Even if it's a fun rat race, even if you're doing a lot of leisure and pleasure, is that where you're going to find you? That undying, eternal aspect of you that was in the beginning with God, that is like and with God? The New Testament says this is life eternal, to know thee, the only true and living God, and Jesus Christ whom thou hast sent. And Jesus Christ's timeless atonement we connect with in the only timeless moment that there is, which is the now. Christ's timeless atonement is accessed in the only moment in time that is not time-bound, and that is the now. That is the present moment. And I'm going to be offering next year a whole course called Time and the Atonement. Anxiety begins with the advent of time. There is no sensation of anxiousness without an attachment to an idea of time. We're either worried about the past or we're fearful of the future. So meditation as a practice and getting still and working on this relationship that you have with stillness, it might seem now like, a good thing to do once in a while, like going to an amusement park. It's like a fun, neat little kitsch activity. But one day it will swallow you up and you'll realize, oh, I've been dead this whole time. And I only come alive when I sink into stillness. And when I collapse into Christ's atoning grace. Stillness is not just about stilling the body and becoming physically still. One can do that and still not be still internally, but it helps. It can help. In fact, they're closely connected, and a lot of people, when our relationship with stillness is fraught or on the rocks, being physically still is the last thing that we want to do. Even when we have downtime, we just start drinking energy drinks, right? Like just pump up the caffeine because I start shaking when I approach stillness. Is that where you're at? Does your body physically start shaking at the thought of approaching dead stillness? Well, I'm going to leave these questions with you. It's up to you. Your relationship with stillness is yours. Mine was mine. I hated stillness for most of my life. Then I developed one. Now I'm head over heels in love with stillness. You can listen to my Ode to Stillness podcast. I've got some kind of freakish crush on stillness, clearly, if you listen to that. But I'm so happy. I know myself so much better. Stillness and peace are inseparable companions. My life is filled with peace. Even my activities are filled with peace. My relationships have all uniformly and vastly improved since the day I approached stillness with a proposal of marriage and have tried to remain as faithful to stillness as she has been to me. Stillness is really the faithful spouse, never leaving us, but always waiting for us to come home. I hope you'll come home and be there with me and with us. All that are present are together. Stillness is salvation. There is no salvation in the past or future, only in the present. And in our presence, in the present moment, we find God's presence. All that are present are together there. And I hope to see you there.